And we'll get going. So welcome to week 4 or lecture number 4. We're going to talk about social awareness today, and this is a two-parter. We'll do part 1 today, part 2 the next time we meet together. It should be a shorter time together than the last couple of weeks have been because we're just going to look at one aspect today. I say that, and it's going to be, longer than you think, but it won't be the whole time frame. But it'll be a little quicker, I think. Oh wait, I didn't want to show that yet. So I wanted to ask you just to take some guesses. We're going to look at briefly at a model that talks about the 6 core human emotions. And I was curious, you might have just saw it on the screen, if you could guess what those 6 most basic human emotions would be. And so we've got just one model we're basing this off of, but I'll kind of explain where it came from. So some of you were spot on with a couple of your guesses. Some of you guessed ones that are accurate human emotions, but maybe they're like subclasses inside these broader 6 emotions. So this is Paul Ekman's theory, where he identified 6 core emotions. These are basic emotions that are universally recognized across cultures. So happiness, sadness, anger, fear, disgust, and surprise. And these emotions are considered basic because they are innate emotions. These emotions are universally recognized across cultures, even in isolated communities, right? So they're not necessarily taught. We're kind of just born with these 6 emotions, I guess would be kind of the premise there. So now they're actually associated. So there's other theories of the most basic emotions, but these ones are associated with facial expressions. So very distinct facial expressions. So Ekman, his research involved analyzing facial expressions, and it led to tools that we actually use in linguistics. One's called, and other disciplines use it as well, but the facial action coding system called FACS. I've seen used a lot in linguistics research, and so that came from this gentleman's work. And of course, there's modifications to this as well and expansions to this, but his framework really is still the foundation of many of the modern emotional intelligence tools that we're using. Yeah, Brittany's mentioning in psych, we could also add contempt in there for the same theory. Yes, absolutely. So it's actually kind of broad reach or far reaching, the whole idea of it. So I set that up for you. So just kind of a knowledge point, the more you know. But our emotional check-in today is going to kind of plays with that a little bit. But what we're going to do for our emotional check-in today is it supports this check-in supports both self-awareness and self-management, which are the 2 domains we just finished covering. So this is just a quick 3-step model adapted from emotional regulation practices in mindfulness-based EI training. And it's just simply called Name, Normalize, and Navigate. So what I want you to do is just pause, take a breath, and silently identify maybe your current emotional state, like the most dominant emotional state you're in. And so here I'm just suggesting I gave you Ekman's framework because maybe some of us aren't at a point where we're very granular with the emotional labels we can give things right now, right? So Ekman's 6 labels gives us a good starting point. So you might want to choose one of these broader categories, or maybe you're able to name it in a more finite way. But just think, what am I feeling right now? This moment, the moment you're watching this. And what I want you to do is briefly reflect, and you can do this in your head or in writing, whatever you prefer, why you're feeling that way. And specifically without harsh judgment of yourself, right? So, I feel fear because I have a presentation coming up tomorrow, right? Or I feel happiness because I had a good morning. Um, I feel angry because I haven't gotten enough sleep. So with this step, we just did name. Now we're normalizing, we're reinforcing emotional validation and self-compassion, which are really important skills for self-awareness, our first domain. So just thinking about the emotion and why, um, grounding it. And, normalize. It's normal to be fearful because you have a presentation. It's normal to be angry because you haven't gotten enough sleep. So that's part of what normalizing it looks like. So you've thought about that. And the next thing we want to do is think about how to take that emotional awareness and make it productive for us. So now we're thinking about self-management, right? That was kind of self-awareness. This stage is self-management, thinking about our intentional outward action based on that emotional state. So if I'm tired, I'll take good notes so I can stay focused. If I'm anxious, I'll remind myself I've gotten through worse. If I'm frustrated, if I'm angry, I'll try to take a deep breath before responding. So here again, we're focusing on the self-management aspect. How am I going to stay productive? How am I going to move from impulse to intentionality right now? So I'll be quiet for a minute so you can situate these three ideas in your own experience. So why this works for today's lesson is we're connecting emotion identification, so self-awareness, right, to behavioral regulation, which is self-management. And this is going to encourage strategic thinking and how to stay on track even when like your emotions are intense. um, it's reinforcing reappraisal. We've used that word a little bit. It's kind of like I kind of interchange it with re-narration. There's probably just a difference there in my mind. They're kind of synonyms, but there's probably a subtle difference. But reappraisal, so changing the way you think about a situation in order to change how you feel about it. And also so there was an assessment you took last week on reappraisal, right? And also those who took the COPE scale. This helps identify what strategies people use when they're dealing with that. That scale helped you identify strategies people use when they're dealing with stress. And those concepts that directly ties here, right? So we're thinking strategically and intentionally about whatever emotion it is we're feeling, making it work for us. I'll just take a minute to pause if anybody has something they want to share. The floor is open. You can share in the chat, or you can unmute and you can share something based on this emotional check-in, but also just to pause and if you've had any aha moments the last couple weeks. And for the record, when I put these recordings online, I actually cut this part out, so your privacy is still there. So if you want to contribute to the chat, feel free to do so at any time today. I'll go ahead and move on. So we are working through these 4 domains. 2 weeks ago, we did self-awareness, so understanding your own emotions, your triggers, your emotional tendencies. Last week in our last video, we did self-management, so regulating those emotions and those tendencies and those behaviors and thoughts so that they're effective for us in different situations. And today we're on social awareness. That is where we're at today. So let's get a working definition for that. Social awareness and emotional intelligence specifically is our ability to really tune in to other people and the situations we're in. So it means like not just noticing emotions, right? But feeling with others through empathy. Hence, we're gonna focus on one skill today. It's gonna be empathy, if you didn't know. But it also includes so much more than empathy, right? It includes understanding group dynamics, cultural norms, unspoken power structures. And those are concepts we'll get into our next video because they're super interesting at how necessary those are for emotional intelligence. But social awareness is what helps us read social cues. So things like, tone of voice, facial expressions, or like group energy, right? Reading the room. And then also taking like perspectives into account. And we'll talk about perspective taking today. So being able to recognize and respond to like emotional currents, your own, but that's kind of the self-awareness stage, right? But the emotions of others, around the emotions of others around us as they're happening in real time rather than after the fact. So rather than later going, I wonder if she was upset with what I did, right? This is real time emotional reading. So self-awareness we've talked about is basically noticing what's happening inside of you. Self-management is choosing your behavior. So social awareness is noticing and accurately reading what's happening around you, and especially in others. No, when we talked about self-awareness, whatever, remember one of the skills or areas was about accurately having accurate self-awareness, right? Because we all have perspectives on ourselves. Is it real? Same with social awareness, noticing and accurately reading what's happening around you and other people. So this is a key feature of emotional intelligence because it's going to connect you. It's the kind of the step towards connecting you with others. You know, it enables empathy and understanding, compassion, things that are very core to human connection, right? Um, Trust and psychological safety. So when you have high social awareness, people feel seen by you, people feel valued by you and heard by you. When you're accurately tuning into them. Obviously, we're going to have improved communication, and we'll talk about communication more in the upcoming weeks because we'll see that a lot with our last domain. But um, communication we give, right? But this is also type of communication like picking up on unspoken cues, so like body language and their tone of voice. Those like emotional undercurrents. No one's saying it, but we feel it, right? We've obviously got to understand that social awareness is key for collaboration. You want to understand group dynamics and other people's emotional states. It's going to lead to smoother teamwork, potentially fewer conflicts with that team. And this is heavily going to influence your ability to lead, whether and teach and serve or what, you know, whatever capacity it is you're in. Whether you're in direct like a leadership position or caregiving or customer facing roles, like social awareness is pretty foundational for influence and support. And we're going to see terms like lead and serve. We're going to see those again in the last domain that we cover. So if you're not figuring it out yet, this is obviously a foundation for our final domain that we're going to get to in 2 weeks. It goes without saying, but I'm going to say it in every video. We talked about self-awareness and how that's a skill, not a trait. Self-management, skill, not a trait. So of course, with social awareness, this is a skill you can learn. You can learn these aspects. You can learn empathy, what we're going to talk about today. It's not necessarily a trait, though, of course, this is one. I keep using this phrase home base throughout our time together, but, you know, depending on your personality and your disposition, disposition. I kept wanting to say deposition, which is a completely different term. Your character, who you are, empathy might be something you are really fine-tuned. It might be really natural for you. Maybe some of you have other talents that kind of maybe suppress how empathy emerges, right? So we'll talk about personality too at the end. But we've got 3 key skills inside of self-awareness. Oh, sorry, social awareness. And those are empathy, um, organizational awareness, and service orientation. When we talk about being really skilled in social awareness, these are the areas we want to focus on. Today, we're just going to focus on empathy, specifically because empathy is kind of the foundation. It's the skill that lets us truly censor what others are feeling and thinking, and it kind of underpins all the other social awareness, the other 2 social awareness skills. So we'll talk about those in our next time together. Because without empathy, organizational awareness, service orientation, those things are going to kind of fall flat. You're not going to be able to fully tune in with people around you. So you're not going to be able to read power structures and power dynamics, cultural norms, and those things there. So we're going to focus on empathy. Before we dive into empathy, I really want to distinguish it from sympathy because there are these 2 things are not the same, right? So we're going to watch a short video. It's got audio by Dr. Brené. I think it's Brené Brown. I've actually never heard her name, but I have like a ton of her books. Or maybe it's Brené, I think it is. If you haven't heard of Dr. Brown, she is a researcher, she's a storyteller, she's done a lot of work on vulnerability, courage, empathy, so many things. Some of you in here, I guarantee, have heard of her. So we're going to hear her perspective real quick on empathy versus sympathy. She's so articulate. I love all her stuff. Her writing's great. Her presentations are great. So what we want to focus on is the empy. That's, I'm coining a new term. Empy, just abbreviating empathy. Empathy is feeling with someone. It's like saying, I get it, I've been there too, or I can imagine how you feel, and you're trying to understand this person's experience from their point of view and connect with that, you know, their experience emotionally. Sympathy is feeling for someone. It's more like saying, That sounds really hard. I'm sorry you're going through that, but from like a bit more distance. You care, but you're not necessarily stepping into their shoes. And we want to distinguish these two terms because empathy is the skill that lets us respond effectively to others' emotions. Sympathy can show concern, but it doesn't give us the insight or connection we need to act emotionally in emotionally intelligent ways. So empathy is active and it's relational, and sympathy is more passive and it's more distance. So we're going to dive into a working definition of empathy. It's obviously sensing others' emotions. And I'm guessing of all the terms we're using in this course, this is the one you're like, I've heard that word. I have a basic idea of this. So we understand it as sensing others' emotions, understanding their perspective, and taking an active interest in their concerns. So we probably mostly hold on to the first part of that definition, sensing others' emotions, but there is a lot of cognitive work we're doing on our end to take their perspective and to genuinely care. Um, to do this, we've got to recognize emotional cues. So what people say and also how they say it, what they're not saying, those facial expressions, the body language, um, being emotionally in tune without letting yourself, to be good at empathy, you've got to be emotionally in tune without letting yourself become overwhelmed by their feelings. And you've also got to suspend judgment to really understand someone else's like inner world rather than like immediately evaluating it or grading it, giving it advice. We'll talk about that too again in a minute. So empathy is about connecting with someone's experience, like really in a thoughtful and very present way. And we've actually got two different types of empathy. So let's just add layer to layer to layer, because that's what we do, right? So good. So there's a difference between emotional empathy and cognitive empathy. And you might find that you actually excel at one of these over the other. And we're going to talk about the assessments you had the opportunity to take before you came here tonight, because different ones were assessing one of these or the other or both, but you took assessments that kind of spoke to these things. So emotional empathy, also being called affective empathy, is when you actually feel what another person feels. You share their emotions automatically. For example, like if you see a friend crying, you might also feel sad, or if you go even extra further, I don't know if any of you can see someone crying and you stop and you start crying with them too. Maybe not a complete stranger, but you're pretty high in like taking on that emotional experience with them. So this is different from cognitive empathy, which is when you understand what someone else is feeling or thinking, but you're not necessarily sharing that emotion, like in the emotion yourself, right? So you as an example, you recognize a friend is upset because of a loss, but you stay pretty calm and think about how to help, right? So you're not jumping to that emotional empathy of I'm feeling their loss with them as if I am them. You're in the calm and cool aspect of it, but you understand how they feel. Just because you have emotional empathy doesn't mean you have cognitive empathy. You could be one or the other. So both forms of empathy matter for emotional intelligence. Emotional empathy helps you like connect with people, have genuine care for people. Cognitive empathy is what helps you understand their perspective and regulate your emotional response appropriately to it. So, I guess as an example, if you imagine a coworker is frustrated about a missed deadline, right? I think we've used this example a couple times. I'm the coworker missing the deadline. So here's what I think everyone's experiencing. With emotional empathy, you feel that coworker's frustration and you feel it very intensely, and you might even get overwhelmed yourself at the fact that the frustration they feel for having missed this deadline. Cognitive empathy is you understand why they're frustrated and can think calmly about how to support them or problem solve with them, right? So these are distinct, they're both valuable. You can see where having one and maybe not the other could cause problems, right? The key takeaway is what I want to say is you don't have to share someone's experience to connect with it, right? Emotional empathy helps you connect. Cognitive empathy helps you like respond basically effectively. So now I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about like training you on how to grow empathy, because like I said, it's a skill you can, grow in. Obviously something that's going to help is when you're in conversations with someone, practice like name the emotion types of exercises during conversations with people, right? Ask them, well, how are you feeling? Like, real, okay, but you said angry, but like, what type of angry, right? Help them communicate um, how they're feeling. But that's also going to build your emotional awareness as well. Listen, building empathy, practice listening without immediately trying to fix things or without immediately judging. Just reflect on what you hear and you feel. And you can also journal about how, like, take perspective taking journaling. You'll kind of get, that's the journal prompt I have for this week. If you follow those, there's quite a few things you can do to start training an empathetic approach to things. Just know it is a skill that can be learned. So we want to learn both types of empathy, though, emotional and cognitive, because it strengthens your social awareness and your emotional intelligence in there. So last week, or before you came to class today, you got to take a few empathy assessments. And so I just wanted to situate those with what we're talking about so far with empathy. I think some of you were invited to take the Toronto Empathy Questionnaire, and that was just short self-report, measure that focused on emotional empathy specifically. So it was looking at your automatic emotional responses to others' experience rather than cognitive, like perspective taking. So it asked things like um, feeling concerned for people less fortunate, getting excited when someone else is excited, feeling upset when you see someone else is upset. So this is obviously emotional empathy, and higher scores indicated higher, like stronger emotional empathy. Um, and this is a really good, this, the Toronto Empathy Questionnaire, the TEQ, is really useful for self-awareness because you kind of track your development over time, compare yourself with different scores. So all of these, I guess, were probably really good for self-awareness. But the Greater Good Empathy Quiz, this one, this one did both emotional and cognitive empathy, and it kind of framed everything in real life scenarios to see kind of how you notice and respond to others' emotions. Um, I think that one's the most approachable, the most student friendly, and also easy to use with other people. But so that one was doing emotional and cognitive empathy. Then the IRI, the Interpersonal Reactivity Index, that one looked at 4 areas. So we had perspective taking, your tendency to adopt like other people's views, right, or other points of view, empathetic concern, feeling of warmth and compassion, personal distress. That was going to be how like anxious you feel in response to other people's distress, right? How do other people's emotions make you feel? And then also this notion of fantasy, so identifying with um, characters in books, movies, or stories. So this one was looking at cognitive and emotional empathy as well, but just kind of through a new framework. So all 3 of these basically help you connect with and help you assess your ability to connect with and understand emotions. We obviously want to have a good gauge on how we're doing with that area, because that's kind of the key, one of the empathy in general and emotional engagement, key component of emotional intelligence. There's not right or wrong answers on these tests necessarily. They're just tools for self-awareness, just tools for development, to kind of situate where you think you fall. But now that you have that awareness of cognitive empathy versus emotional empathy, you might be able to go back through those assessments and look at your results kind of with a new lens. Um, empathy sounds, I don't really feel like in general our culture is against empathy. Like it's not, I think strongly it's more of a feminine trait. Absolutely. I know when I meet men that get empathy as a Clifton strength, um, there's a little bit, oh, does that feel weak? Or, kind of aspect to it. It's not a very common strength with men, actually. I married one. My husband's got empathy as a talent. Anyways, so but there's kind of some connotations about the word empathy, meaning like it kind of feels just like a feeling or a heart matter, right? But what I wanted to situate it as is it's a brain-based skill, right? It's beyond your heart, it's beyond your feelings. It is brain-based. So, um, just to kind of tell you some of the cool science there, at the core of empathy, this is really what's happening up here, are mirror neurons. And these neurons You can't tell I'm a linguist. I wish I spoke a second language so my speech issues sounded like, oh, she's just speaking in another language. It's not what's happening. Just didn't read a lot as a kid. Anyways, these neurons fire not only when we act, but also when we see someone else act. So they allow us, mirror neurons allow us to emotionally mirror what others are experiencing. And that obviously is going to lay the foundation for like emotional empathy. So our brains are wired to feel what others feel. And there's also some other areas of the brain that kind of bring empathy to life. You've got your interior insula, that helps you feel others' emotions. It's kind of like your emotional hub of your brain. There's another aspect of the interior something cortex, that ACC, where it tunes us interior cingulate cortex or something like that. I don't know if you care about the brain words more so that the brain does cool things. So that's the gist you're getting. So that tunes us into other people's pain and helps us regulate our own emotional responses so we don't get overwhelmed. So that one, so remember, emotional empathy is feeling the person's, emotional pain with them, but you run the risk of feeling overwhelmed with them as well, right? It can take a life on in its own life. So this interior cingulate, I think, cortex is what's going to help with that cognitive empathy. You've got like prefrontal cortex, like the medial area that supports cognitive empathy as well. It's going to help you step into someone else's shoes. It's the part of our brain we're going to use for perspective taking, so that imagination of being in someone else's shoes. And there's another part that helps us understand where we end and someone else begins. So staying grounded in your own identity while still connecting with others. It's something like I think it's got the nickname TPJ, but it's like a long word I'm never going to memorize. Brain is super cool. So the brain, all these things I'm talking about, is where attunement comes in. So attunement means being deeply present, really tuning in to someone's tone of voice, facial expression, their posture. This is what I meant earlier when I said empathy is something we do in real time, right? It's not just noticing emotions though, it's resonating with them. And based on neuroscience, these mirror neurons help us kind of sync up with others. The insula and the ACC, they help us feel it. And then that prefrontal cortex helps us stay steady and able to respond thoughtfully. So your brain's working really hard for this little feeling-based thing. So empathy and attunement, though, what we're doing with our brains are not fixed traits. The brain has the ability to change. I've kind of made that point the last couple times we've been together. The more we practice skills, the more we listen, the more we reflect, we're training these different parts of our brain that work on this emotional empathy process, right? So empathy, it's not just in your heart. It's not just feelings. It's something actually in your head. Why we miss signals. So if you're low in empathy, I just want to talk about some of the things. Actually, you don't have to be low on empathy. Some of us can be highly empathetic, and you've got days where you're just like, whoa, I didn't know they were feeling that way when I did that, right? Like we're just missing the moments to be empathetic. So there's 3 key reasons: bias, stress, and distraction. I'll break each of these down. Being biased means bringing in your own assumptions, your own values, your own beliefs, before truly listening, right? So this is a good idea. This is a good example. If you let's say you work with someone who you typically think of as overreacting or as slightly dramatic, you're going to dismiss their pain really quickly instead of trying to understand it, right? Because you've made a judgment about them. So no matter what they bring to you, even if they're in the hospital, we've all been there. Someone's really maybe actually in pain, but you're so over them, you're like, I don't care. So empathy's out the window. So biasness obviously hurts empathy because you're seeing them through a filter. You're not really seeing them clearly. When I talked about in self-awareness, one of the things you had to be aware of were your values and your own goal and self-management. You're going to hear this term values and ethics and beliefs, because where those sit for you, heavily influence your success in emotional intelligence. It doesn't mean you have to have the same beliefs as everyone, but knowing yours, having like a really good grasp of what yours are, is going to help you understand what might get in the way of effectively listening to someone, right? Um, so you're going to see the term values and beliefs come up again when we look at our next domain. Stress, obviously, if you're kind of emotionally overloaded, you have a very narrow focus. Your brain's probably in survival mode. So you're focused really on your own problems. And it's really hard at that point to tune into other people. If you're overwhelmed with deadlines, you're going to miss that your coworker's going to have a tough day, right? So stress is really going to hurt empathy because you're emotionally maxed out. You don't have the capacity to care in that moment for another person. Then finally, there's distraction. So it's just when you're simply not present. Maybe you're on your phone thinking about your to-do list or like mentally checked out. I think I do this to my husband a lot. So um, yeah, true. It's kind of like when you're nodding when someone's talking, but you're not really like trying to absorb what they're saying. And obviously, this is going to hurt empathy because you can't pick up on emotional cues if you're not paying attention. And you can't build trust and you can't lead and you can't do a lot of things if we're distracted, right? So, like, biasness is what's going to cloud your judgment, like, cloud your viewpoint of someone. Stress is going to drain your capacity to even give a care, right? And then distraction just pulls your focus away. And all three are typically the reasons we kind of get, we're not able to truly notice and respond to how someone feels, of course. Now, perspective taking. Well, by the way, when we talk next time about the rest of this skill, we'll circle back to the fact that, biasness, stress, distraction or disengagement, those are all normal things a mentally healthy person experiences. When we talk about some of the things that get in the way of um, social management. I forgot what we were talking about today. Obviously, we're going to talk just briefly next week about things like, autism. Some of those things, it basically make things like your brain working for empathy a lot harder, right? And reading social cues is not easy. So we'll talk about some of those things and how they connect back to getting maybe barriers or things we need to consider when we're talking about empathy and social awareness in general. But let's talk about perspective taking because Dr. Brown, myself, we've talked about this being a big aspect of empathy. You've heard the phrase, put yourself in someone else's shoes. That's basically what perspective taking in, the ability to imagine what someone else might be thinking or what they might be feeling. And it's not necessarily feeling it with them. It's understanding it intellectually, and that's cognitive empathy. That's not emotional empathy, right? So the thing I want to drive home with perspective taking is just because you take someone's perspective doesn't mean you're agreeing with them. You're not giving up your opinion or changing your mind. You're simply saying, oh, okay, I see where you're coming from. So, for example, maybe someone has a completely different take on an issue than you do. Perspective taking, like through perspective taking, you might understand why they have that different take. So maybe it's their upbringing, their life experiences, like something that's currently stressing them. So you're not saying they're right on the side of the issue they've come on. Or that you believe like the same thing. You're just recognizing from their point of view, it makes sense why you've come to that, right? So it's a super useful skill. In conversations and relationships, it's going to help you connect better with others. It's going to help avoid conflict. I guess I would just say the bottom line is it helps you understand people better, but it doesn't mean you have to become them. So, but it is a core part of cognitive empathy, right? It also supports organizational awareness, which is another skill we're covering next week when you apply it to workplaces and like community settings. But it's primarily falls under empathy because it's about individual level attunement. Now, we're not going to do breakout rooms, but I thought about it. But I think I will tell you, I did this as breakout rooms the first time I taught this topic, and it went really well. I wanted it to go well, but it went too well because everyone now at this point has been so trained on emotional intelligence, it didn't have the effect that I thought maybe it could have. But so we're not going to do breakout groups, but I want you to take like a mental practice moment on perspective taking just for a second. Like envision yourself entering a conversation about one of these topics where you might have a pretty strong opinion. You want to ask yourself, how do I feel like to practice perspective taking in this conversation, right? So I kind of have like a low level to high level conversation. There were so many more, like I could have put a million red ones on there. Red meaning like, oh, that's kind of like high emotional. Uh, the red means basically you get maybe a lot of emotional impulse reactions, right? It's a little more sensitive of a topic. Maybe the work from home thing isn't, right? But any of these are items as examples that someone's going to have a perspective on. Maybe they're not set, have their heels set and dug in over it. But if there's one of these where you take a side on it, it can be really hard to think about perspective taking, because again, you're not taking someone else's side. You're just going, I see where you arrived at that based on your experience and your information. So when you're thinking about these things, notice your initial reaction, what assumptions you have, your own emotional response. That we got to practice that self-awareness and self-management first when you're entering these to build up to perspective taking, right? Then, you don't basically, then you're ready to take on, like, after self-awareness, self-management, you can kind of take on the challenging yourselves on the empathy aspect, the perspective taking. So you don't have to agree with them or change your mind. You're just looking to see where they're coming from, what might be shaping their viewpoint, how that might influence how they feel and how they're responding. So this is really the heart of perspective taking, is understanding where someone else's viewpoint um, is while staying grounded in your own, right? Because we're not pushovers with empathy. We're grounded in our own values, but we're emotionally intelligent about how we're going to communicate these things and listen to people, right? Um, Even practicing this mentally can help strengthen your social awareness. So we didn't do it as an actual breakout room, because I mean, you're also uh, trained now. It would be completely productive conversations, which is what I wanted it to be. But this, doing it in class, it's one thing. In the real world, some of these conversations are really hot topics, right? And I know that I work with some people who fall really hard on certain sides of the line. So, how do we have those conversations productively? Um, well, maybe I fall on a different side, right? But like, everyone walks away with, respect and teamwork still kind of as the connecting point. So, yeah, so we're not going to actually do this, but had we done it, one thing I would have us do afterwards is the quick calm down, use our quick calm down methods that I presented last time we were together, just our box breathing. Did anybody get to try any of these methods this week? They're kind of elementary, but I see Brittany not. I see a couple of you nodding. Yeah, I have the Finch app, the thing with the little birdie that I like, and every day he has me take three. He's a boy, I guess. I don't know. Anyways, he has me take 3 deep breaths, and I've been doing that before I have to talk, like tonight, things that make me very anxious, and it genuinely kind of gives me a momentary reset. So it is really useful. We're about to wrap up soon. So we covered the first of the 3 skills of social awareness, which is empathy. So sensing others' emotions, understanding their perspective, taking an active interest in their concerns. Uh, Now, one thing I also made for you, I'm looking for it on my screen real quick because I got like all these windows open apparently, is I went ahead and let me do a new share real quick. Made again. This has kind of been fun for me to think through. So I will say, if you, because I'm really want to bring in our personality stuff again, um, to kind of start practicing more of that self-awareness aspect. So anyways, I made our 3 documents again, where I took Clifton strengths and took each talent and compared it to what empathy might look like. So how can that talent be a positive? How can that talent maybe present a blind spot, right? I did the same thing with 16 personalities again, as well as the 24 character strengths. These are in our course shell together, and I'll also like link them with the video. But things to think about. It's funny because I have empathy as one of my Clifton strengths. So you think I just really excel in this emotional intelligence aspect, but it doesn't work that way, right? So I'm good at emotional empathy. I really am. I also have restorative as a talent. So it means I like to fix problems. So I'm really good at emotional empathy and I'm really good at going, all right, here's what you could do, right? But I get so absorbed in other people's pain that I like go to bed at night still feeling bad about whatever someone was going through or still feeling mad with them. I've got a friend of mine who has a difficult relationship with her boss right now. Um, and the boss sounds like a really bad guy. I go to bed fighting him. I don't even know that I'm not friends with the guy, but that okay. So there's a line where empathy can also can be a blind spot, right? We don't want it to overtake our lives. We have to balance it. But what I would like you to do is, as you're reading these each week, and I'm making connections with the skills and the domains. If you're reading your talent or your personality trait, and you're like, hey, that doesn't quite sound like what I'm experiencing. Let me know. I'm pretty well versed in many of these, so I'm kind of making assertions of what I think's happening there. But I'd love your input as well, just to help develop these slides a little more. So going back to where we were at, new share. Where are you? All right. So what else we got? Okay, for assignments preparing for next week, I think I already opened them. I think it's just I can't remember the assessments. It's just I think they're on communication styles or something like that or conflict. Now they're actually those assessments are going to equip us. I think it's our last week of assessments anyways, but they're going to if I said that too soon, I'm not sure. Maybe there's one more week. We're almost done with assessments, but basically we're the ones you're taking I think this week kind of also prepare for the next couple weeks, so feel free to look at those. And then we also have our journal, and as far as our journal, just a prompt idea was maybe to practice perspective taking by interviewing someone from a different background or of some sort, just to kind of develop practice perspective taking, right? Intentionally listening and asking questions. Remember, part of empathy is basically active interest in someone else and their concerns and their experiences. So you guys can practice that. All right, that's all I had for today. Yeah, 30 minutes early, right? That feels good.